direct access, but sometimes it's about speed. Similar data from an analysis by a group called Common Sense Media and the Boston Consulting Group, 36% of Kentucky students lack adequate internet, as well as 10% of our teachers trying to deliver instruction to students. The Pritchard Committee recognized this digital divide and the impact that it would likely have through COVID in the first couple weeks of the pandemic, and have been talking about it ever since. As more Kentuckians, as I've mentioned, are working remotely and taking online classes, it becomes an imperative for us to figure this challenge out. Since early May, we've been drawing attention to this inequity by asking citizens to tell Congress to fund universal broadband. Nearly 500 Kentuckians have sent an email to their congressman. Those who wish to send a message listening to this broadcast today can do so via a link in the Facebook comments. We've enlisted other organizations to send a letter to Congress when we went to our congressman in May. Those groups included 55,000 Degrees, the Kentucky Farm Bureau, and 12 other business, education, and healthcare organizations. There's also, since we're talking with suppliers today, additional context around legislation in the state of Kentucky that I expect we'll get to in our conversation. In the most recent session of the General Assembly, the 2020 session, House Bill 362 set up a grant fund for broadband projects. However, no money was appropriated, likely due to COVID. House Bill 553 is a tax credit designed to draw more investment for broadband build out, but this bill did not pass in the last session. We expect this to be a big part of the conversation as we move into the 2021 General Assembly session. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Ellen Call is the Director of State Government Affairs for Charter Communications in Louisville. She's also a former Pritchard Committee member. Ellen, welcome to Facebook Live with us today, and thank you for joining us.
Listen, thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Excellent. Leslie Crampy is the Commercial Accounts and Economic Development Specialist for Kenergy Corporation, a customer-owned nonprofit energy cooperative in Henderson, Kentucky, but serving many surrounding counties. Leslie, welcome, and thank you for taking the time out this afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We have Keith Gabbard, who is the CEO and General Manager of People's Rural Telephone Cooperative in McKee, Kentucky. Keith, welcome.
Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. And lastly, Jamie Link. Jamie is the Executive Director of the Kentucky Communications Network Authority, which manages and oversees the Commonwealth's open access broadband network, otherwise known as KyWired. And Jamie, you've been in this role just this year in 2020, correct?
Yes, ma'am, just 6 months now, and we're looking forward to helping address this critical need for our state.
Yes, and thank you, Jamie, for taking time out and the time that you've spent with me on the phone. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I'd like to just kind of open us up with a general question right off the top. As we've had discussions about this issue, it's clear that maybe we need to address how we define adequate access and whether or not adequate access has changed pre-pandemic to now in the midst of a pandemic, and what we think adequate access to the broadband means as we move into a new normal post-COVID-19. Ellen? Yep.
Yeah, I think that it really makes sense to kind of break this, because we have a problem, right? We have a problem all over the country. We're all focused on fixing this problem of the digital divide in Kentucky, but I think it will kind of help the conversation if we break it down into two parts. Because we really have an urban problem that has its own characteristics and possible policy solutions, and we have a rural access problem. And they're really quite different and require different approaches. In urban areas in Kentucky, it is not an access issue. There is, if you just take the urban core in Louisville, we have a very robust network, in downtown Louisville. Other providers do too. But the barrier to adoption is cost. Folks cannot afford to take the product. If you look at rural areas, we have a different challenge where the cost of building out to some very rural parts of Kentucky has been prohibitive for every provider. And so there are, different policy approaches that we can take to fixing that problem. But I think it probably makes sense. They really are two different problems. So it probably makes sense to kind of break those up as we talk about them.
Completely agree, Ellen. It's very different across the state of Kentucky, the barriers and the challenges. When we think about, I guess, what really is adequate access, do we agree that in this day and age, everyone needs to have access to the information superhighway, to the
Yes.
internet, and that requires sufficient broadband capacity to do so?
Absolutely.
Amy, you said absolutely.
Yes. And that's one area I hope that the Kentucky Wired project can bring, especially to those areas that are underserved or unserved, quite frankly, and working with numerous partners to bring that service to these areas. We'll have termination points in all 120 counties across Kentucky. So obviously, as you mentioned, Bridget, the Kentucky Wired project is a middle mile, but we want to work with the current providers and with perhaps some new providers that may, as has been identified, I think, across the country. People are getting innovative in how they're starting to develop that last mile, where perhaps that service has not been available before through cooperations or cooperatives and other such mechanisms. So we look forward to partnering with the colleagues here on this call and others to bring this service out to our citizens.
And that innovation, Jamie, as you mentioned, is going to be critical as we figure out how to kind of patchwork universal access together.
Yes.
You all in McKee, Jackson County, Kentucky, you figured some of this out through some innovation.
Yeah, we serve Jackson and Owsley County and have since 1950, and we built a 100% all fiber optic network. It was completed in 2014. So every single home and business in both of our counties, countywide, has a gigabit connectivity, has opportunity for gigabit connectivity. And they can get that gigabit for under $100 a month. They can get 100 meg for under $40 a month. So it's, we think that's reasonably priced, but, we still have a lot of poverty. It's very rural counties that we serve, a lot of poverty, and, still everyone doesn't take broadband services for various reasons, and we are always looking for opportunities to figure out ways, and there are federal and state initiatives to help with Lifeline programs and USF programs, things like that, to help with affordability, and we try to take advantage of them and inform our people about them. But there's still a challenge. Like in our area, 68% of our houses passed have broadband. Of our customer base, about 80% have broadband. There's still a lot of people out there in our area that don't have broadband when they can get, we have an all fiber network and they can get whatever speed they want.
$100 a month in many parts of rural Kentucky and urban Louisville is still a lot of money for folks.
Yes, that's why most people don't get a gig. Most people may get 100 meg or something like that because it's more like $35 or $40 a month.
And that's a great point. The pricing based on the, I guess, quality of the access is not the right word.
And we just rolled out a plan after talking to our school system here, with school getting ready to start back, trying to help kids, to where we call it LifeNet, but it's tied into the federal Lifeline plan. There's already about approximately a $10 discount for broadband on the federal Lifeline program. And we're offering school kids, if they qualify for federal Lifeline, we're offering them a $19.95 plan for 25 meg, 25 down, 25 up and down. And, with that discount, that's really more like a $10 plan. So, we feel like we're getting down to where almost anybody can afford it if they want it.
So Leslie, you all are trying to think innovatively in the western part of the state. The co-op that you represent is. Thoughts about, as you all think about what is adequate access? What's your kind of operating, I guess, theory as you think about being innovative in Western Kentucky?
Absolutely. Well, we cover 14 counties in Northwest Kentucky, approximately 44,000 homes and businesses. So we're looking at other states and what they've done as far as the electric cooperatives. Tennessee is just killing it. They've got 13 out of 23 of their cooperatives that are on active broadband projects. So we're just trying to look in Kentucky and see how we can change the landscape and how electric cooperatives can be part of the program, like we did back in the 30s with the rural electrification. So for adequate service, we go by the FCC standards of 25.3 is what we consider adequate, but I think that'll be surpassed very quickly as we see the need is increasing.
So Leslie, talk a little bit more about that, how you define adequate and for a lay person. Help us unpack what does that mean for a family at home? What is kind of adequate internet for, say, a family of 4 or 5? How are you thinking about that?
I may not be the right person to answer this question, but 25.3 means 25 download, or am I getting that backwards? Download, and then 3 megabits per second upload. So that's the speed at which the broadband is entering. Fiber is can get up to a gigabit, and it can be symmetrical service. So Keith may be able to speak to that, or Jamie, but that talks about the speed and latency.
Okay,
Yeah,
so that's what you were saying. 25 is that price point, I guess you're trying to market to families.
right. And I think FCC's definition of broadband is 25.3 as Leslie said, but we do all our plans synchronous, which means same speed up and down. So we do everything 25, or 100, or gig. It's all the same with our company. Most companies don't do that. So that's not the norm, but with all fiber network, we're capable of doing that.
Ellen, in Louisville, you all are thinking about the different speeds, I guess, and marketing to an appropriate package, I guess, to families that families can afford and still gets them the kind of access that they need to work and learn.
Yeah, and we have a wide range of options available. All of our customers in Kentucky can buy a gig speed if they want to. Our minimum that we offer just under normal plans is 100 megabits per second. But I wanted just to share something that is a program that we've developed that has been really helped bridge the divide somewhat in the urban areas mostly. And that's something called Spectrum Internet Assist. So this is a program that is open to families with kids on the school lunch program, and then also to senior citizens on the SSI program. It costs $17.99 a month, and it is a 30 meg internet service. And so, again, it's a lower speed. It's still adequate, we think, to support distance learning. And the price point, $18 a month. We are hoping that, that'll be attractive to a lot of families that are, trying to get online so that they can, help their kids do this distance learning. Because I don't know what you all are hearing, but it just looks like it's not going away anytime soon, and so
yeah. So Ellen, we hear a lot about hotspots across the state and the rapid response as COVID hit, whether it was rural areas or urban areas, was to get lots of hotspots out there for families to use. The Spectrum Internet Assist is different than providing a hotspot. Can you just unpack for us the different responses and what might be a more sustainable response as we move forward, knowing we aren't going to probably boomerang back to what we were used to 6 months ago?
Sure. So yeah, a lot of school districts in particular, let's face it, we were all everybody was doing the best they could with their hair on fire in March, trying to figure out how do we get these families connected so that we can support the distance learning. And some districts did deploy the hotspots. So listen, it is better than nothing. But if you have multiple people in the household who are trying to get on the internet, that's really tough with a hotspot. And a lot of families have multiple children who are school age, right? Who are all trying to do their distance learning at the same time. So that's, you know, a little bit more of a Band-Aid approach, I think. This Spectrum Internet Assist is a wireline connection. You can add Wi-Fi to it and support, you know, multiple devices throughout the home, right? So I think that that's something, some kind of, just right now where technology is, I think a low cost wireline solution is really the best to support any kind of sustained distance learning.
So that would kind of be the, I guess, midterm response as we move forward. We kind of had the rapid response. Now, how do we get to a little bit more sustainable response?
Yeah.
That would be part of that. And it sounds like both, Keith, you all in Eastern Kentucky, and Ellen in Louisville, you're trying to figure out those lower price options to get to families as an assist.
We are. We actually, in March, when this all, as Ellen said, everybody was just trying to do whatever we could, but we don't even have McDonald's here in our 2 counties. So we set up about 7 hotspots and just gave some free drive up Wi-Fi in some buildings and volunteer fire departments, and libraries and things like that, just to help the people that didn't have anything and were going through the non-traditional instruction and needed something. And so we worked with school systems, and then eventually the schools set up their own Wi-Fi at each of their schools. And we actually had all schools in our 2 counties connected with fiber for 20 years. So we've partnered with our school systems for a long, long time. Of course, you know, we're small, and everybody knows everybody here, and it's a little bit different than having national companies and things like that. But that's the way we try to do it here.
So Keith, you mentioned some funds that maybe you as the supplier are accessing directly to help families, if I understood you right. And are those federal funds for support for low-income individuals to access broadband?
Yeah, there's something called the Universal Service Fund that the FCC sort of oversees, and it's got several programs. So the E-rate is one of those programs, which I know you're all very familiar with. Mm-hmm. Also, Lifeline is a program that helps low-income people get a discount on their voice or broadband. It used to be just voice, now it's broadband or voice. And then there's also assistance to high-cost companies to help provide broadband to very remote areas, which we're one of them. But the Lifeline program has pretty strict guidelines as to who's eligible to get that discount. And one of the things that's happening in Washington right now is they're talking about relaxing maybe some of those guidelines and letting more people be eligible, because it's pretty strict. It's SSI. It's I don't have all the guidelines right in front of me, but they've changed some of them, made it a little more restrictive to where less money is available. But the program we're talking about, much like Ellen's, is, you know, if you're eligible for that, you can get this discounted rate, and then of course, you know, there's plenty of other programs for building broadband, but that particular one is for the customer.
And so Keith, is the customer applying directly for that support, or are you applying on behalf of geography that is
That's a very good question. That's changed almost monthly with the FCC. It used to be we would do it all for them. And then the FCC started asking them to do it, and we still try to help them through it.
Okay.
But it's got much more difficult, and we've about 2/3 of the people that were on Lifeline before with us. At one time we had 1,500 customers on Lifeline. Now it's down to 500, and part of that is due to the difficulty of being certified and recertified every year. I understand they're trying to make sure there's no fraud. That's their whole reason for it, but the difficulty is making it more challenging for people to stay on it.
So Ellen,
you can have it on wireline or wireless, but not both.
Okay. So Ellen, is Spectrum, I'm assuming Spectrum is utilizing those federal funds in some way as well. How does it, or is Spectrum offering the assist simply kind of from private?
Yeah. So those funds, and I don't know all of the rules. I think the Keith, the telcos take advantage of some of those more than companies like Spectrum. But yes, the Spectrum Internet Assist Program is supported, and it's a philanthropic effort on our part. And most of the major providers have some sort of offering like that, some sort of low cost offering. AT&T does, Comcast, Spectrum does. So it's we're all trying to make a dent in this. I will tell you, our experience, even at the $18 a month price point, that is still, there are a lot of families that don't have it, even what seems to us like a very, very small amount of money that is beyond the reach of a lot of families. I mean, the Jefferson County Public Schools, they have about 100,000 students, and I believe it's about 6,000 of those kids are homeless.
Yeah.
So we have some really extraordinary poverty issues that we're trying to overcome, that even a really strong offering like the Spectrum Internet Assist is not discounted enough to reach every single person who needs it.
Mm-hmm. So Keith, or Jamie, I'd like to turn to you now. And Ellen, thank you for kind of introducing the idea that we have different issues within the access issue. And one is about income and others are about the actual infrastructure. And so, Jamie, I'd like to turn to you now to really talk about that infrastructure, kind of what's happened in Kentucky, if you want to share a little bit of background over the last, I guess, decade plus. With KyWired trying to get the middle mile. What is a middle mile? And now that we've made headway with the middle mile, what are the strategies to get the last mile, which is basically into Kentucky families' homes?
Sure. The analogy that we use typically is we're building the interstate highway, and all the on and off ramps. So we've built over 3,300 miles of fiber across the Commonwealth, with an on-ramp and an off-ramp into each county. And that middle mile will then carry the signal to the internet drain. I think there's an internet drain in Louisville and one in Cincinnati that basically attaches that end user to the World Wide Web. So we are scheduled to be complete with our project at the end of October of this year. So we're in the very late stages of completing this network. It was originally envisioned in 2014, I believe, by Congressman Hal Rogers and Governor Steve Beshear to build out this statewide network called KyWired. I work for the Kentucky Communications Network Authority that was statutorily created to manage this project. Beginning in 2015, the Commonwealth entered into contracts to affect the design and construction of this network. At this point, as I said, we're in the late stages, pushing toward completion. So obviously, I think with the colleagues here on the call and then those viewing, the last mile now becomes the prevalent issue facing us. So as a part of the agreement that was crafted back in 2015, there is a company called Open Fiber Kentucky that is a partner with the Commonwealth and entered into a revenue sharing agreement with us to provide last mile services either directly or through partner organizations, partner companies, to affect that connection to the residential customer, the commercial customer, the industrial customer, and educational institutions, the state universities, KCTCS, and that is now the primary focus that we're shifting toward is going from more of a construction model into a more operational model. Let's get this network lit up and get people connected and operating. And certainly the tenets of the project were to service all Kentuckians with an emphasis on, again, those unserved or underserved areas across the state. And certainly the benefits, we're certainly here to talk about the educational component of broadband service, but Expanding upon that a little bit, certainly the economic development benefits, the public safety benefits, the health and wellness benefits. Broadband, in my opinion, is now critical infrastructure in today's world, and perhaps not as important as water and sewer and electricity and natural gas and whatnot, but we see it now, and I think COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of connectivity and the need for this service. And we look forward to working with all of the partners we can, because again, in my mind, the ultimate goal of this is our citizens and our businesses, and to make sure they have the opportunities that broadband can bring to their lives, and the opportunity to succeed, whether it be in education or in business, or to remain healthy or improve their health, whatever the case may be.
Kind of the three legs of the stool, if you will, for quality of life and growth in a state.
Right.
Health, education, and economic development.
Yes.
And they all three go hand in hand, and the internet is a critical component to growth in all three. So
Right.
Jim, you've mentioned, you've mentioned the need for innovation. You've kind of touched on this idea that, part of the theory of change behind KyWired is public-private partnerships across the state that would ensure this access actually into families' homes.
Right.
More critical today than we even thought 6 months ago.
Right.
Hubs 6 months ago seemed okay. E-rate
Right.
that
Right.
wired our schools and our libraries. But our kids are not in our schools and our libraries, and probably won't be even into the fall. So can you share with us some examples at the local level of public-private partnerships that have been or are proving promising as we move forward to get this last part of the work complete?
Well, and I will defer to the other panelists on the meeting as well, but we certainly we view our role as being that, again, that internet or that interstate highway that can help carry data in bulk to the World Wide Web, to and from the World Wide Web and the end user. So we would look, obviously I mentioned Open Fiber Kentucky as we call them the wholesale partner with this project. When the Commonwealth built this network, and not to get overly technical, because I can't get overly technical, the Commonwealth built 288 fiber network, a cable across the state. For the Commonwealth's use, we needed 144 fibers. But while you're in the process of constructing the network, installing 288 fibers wasn't that much more expensive than installing 144. So while you're doing the construction, it just made sense to go on for future growth and capacity to build a robust infrastructure to accommodate the future needs of our state. So my agency is charged with the connection of state government agencies, and certainly we would like to have conversations with the Kentucky Department of Education for K through 12. I mentioned earlier that we are and have been working with the universities and KCTCS, but also quasi-governmental organizations such as libraries and health departments and those types of organizations to bring that service. And then working with Open Fiber and with the private sector partners, how can we maximize the benefit of this interstate highway to bring that service to those end users, and whether that's the companies that are represented here. I've read articles about other states where communities and counties have formed cooperatives to start delivering their own broadband service, perhaps where it hasn't been available in the past. And I fully recognize and appreciate the economic realities that companies have. You know, they have to evaluate the economic viability of investing millions upon millions of dollars into areas, and based on the demand and the customer base in that area of the population. So I look at Kentucky Wired as hopefully being that bridge to provide some of that infrastructure that these last mile partners can then bring that service to the end user.
Yeah, that's helpful, Jamie, as I think, folks listening in today, families, parents, community leaders are trying to figure out all the details of the challenge before us.
I can give you an example of
Yeah,
they're partnering with Kentucky Wired.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie, probably happened before you came on board, but we're partners with 4 other small telcos in Eastern Kentucky, telecom broadband providers, a company by the name of the East Kentucky Network, and our company partnered with Kentucky Wired to build 21 counties of this fiber network and build the fibers into the courthouses and the libraries and wherever state offices. And as a result of that, our particular company, we build into 4 counties, and we also partnered with our rural electric cooperative. And one of those counties, they had an office with very poor broadband. So we partnered with Kentucky Wired with our rural electric cooperative, and we started building fiber into an adjoining county that we didn't serve. And we now serve portions of 2 adjoining counties with fiber to the home, and we are expanding our footprint and with partnerships with different companies, and also we've applied for some grants and low interest loans and been successful in getting a couple of small ones too. So we're trying to leverage every way that we can to build fiber to the home to more areas in Eastern Kentucky in ways that we can make a business case for it.
Right.
Keith, what advice do you offer to others across the state, co-ops, community organizations, community partners who are trying to figure out how to do this? What do you say to them? What was the magic mix for you all?
Well, I think part of it is just got to be willing to look outside the box a little bit. And we've been accustomed to serving our 2 counties for 70 years. And you get comfortable in that if you don't watch out. And we saw this as an opportunity. Actually, at first, Kentucky Wired, we saw it as a threat. Like, they're going to take some business away from us. But we figured out a way to try to make lemonade out of lemons. And there's plenty of cable companies out there that can partner. There's plenty of electric companies out there that can partner. And there's 20 telephone companies in Kentucky, 10 cooperatives that a lot of people never heard of. But most of these small telcos are providing fiber to the home type service and a good broadband, but it's just not enough. There's still so many places in the state that don't have it, but there are a lot of programs out there, federal, that you can apply for money to help you. And we're actively doing that. And like the USDA has the Reconnect program, they have the Community Connect program. And we've got a couple of those small grants. There's the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, the RDOF program that's going to happen this fall. We're trying to participate in all those. The state, which you may be going to talk about later, the state's just started a grant or a matching grant program. No money allocated to it yet, but we are definitely going to try to participate in that, because some of these areas there's not a good business case for, but if you can get some help in the initial capital, you can build out that last mile. And the last mile is what we're actively trying to build out to as many, almost all surrounding counties around us are calling us saying, can you build this fiber network to us? Can you help us? We don't have great broadband. And obviously we can't do it to everybody, but we're trying to do it in a lot of areas.
So an important point, Keith, that you just made about House Bill 362 that passed in the 2020 legislative session but wasn't funded. And so we would look in 2021 for some funding into that grant pool, particularly now.
Yes, and I read somewhere where like 38 states already have grant programs, state grant programs for broadband. So I know we've probably been focused more on the middle mile on the Kentucky Wired lately, but we definitely need to get something out there for the last mile.
Leslie, I want to get you in here representing, Keith representing the telephones and you representing one of our energy co-ops, and you're trying to figure out, Kenergy's actively trying to figure out how to kind of broker one of these public-private partnerships locally and get more access to folks in Northwestern Kentucky. What are some of the opportunities for you and the challenges?
Yes. Well, in Northwest Kentucky, in our 14 counties, we are typically unserved completely or underserved, meaning there's not enough access. So we are definitely rural Kentucky, and we are struggling with any access at all. There are 24 electric cooperatives across the state of Kentucky. Together, all of those cooperatives power the lives of 1.5 million people in 117 of Kentucky's 120 counties. 19 of those cooperatives are regulated by the Kentucky Public Service Commission, while the other 5 are regulated by TVA. So right now, the organizations or the cooperatives that are regulated by the Public Service Commission are not able to provide broadband services like the telephone cooperatives, the municipals, and the TVA regulated co-ops and telecoms. So we definitely have a disadvantage there. And so we're looking to just make the change in our state, kind of be the trailblazer and change the law so that we can be a provider. It doesn't make sense in every electric cooperative in Kentucky because some of those have telephone co-ops that can already do that. So it wouldn't make sense to really compete or to offer the service there, but we don't have telephone cooperatives in our area. So we're hoping that we can at least change the law.
And was there a bill in the last session, Leslie, that you all were actively working on?
We were actively working on one. We were kind of late to the game on that. And then when COVID hit, it was quickly dismissed. So we didn't get a chance to present that, but we are picking up our efforts and hopefully we'll have one very soon.
So Ellen, Spectrum provides service in lots of areas of Kentucky. Kind of give us your perspective on kind of the public-private partnership piece, how we patchwork something together that supports the entire state.
Sure. So let me just give you just some context on where we are in Kentucky. So over 80% of households in Kentucky have access to our service. We have about 750,000 customers right now in Kentucky. In terms of our investment in expanding our service, last year we expanded service to 32,000 households in Kentucky. About 40% of those were in rural areas. Each year we spend over $150 million expanding service in Kentucky, and we have over 500 construction projects in Kentucky right now that are very active to provide service. So we're leaning in hard to this, but obviously we're not the only solution. And, in terms of policy ideas that really will help, I think, we've been talking about the broadband grant program. That's been incredibly effective in other states. HB 362 provides for a 50-50 match. So, each provider puts up 50% to build, and it targets areas where there's no 25 meg service, no 25/3 service. It's a really good model. It's a very targeted approach. Other states have had a great deal of success, using this approach. And I'm crossing my fingers that we can find some money to put into that fund next session. I'm also realistic about the devastating impact that the pandemic has had on every government budget at every level, but it really is a good model. And if I could talk about something very boring that will actually help, but it's pole attachments. And, pole attachments are just the lifeblood of rural broadband. And if the rates are where they need to be and the terms and conditions and the timeliness of getting permission to put your equipment on the poles, if all those things are in place, we can really roll out rural broadband more efficiently. If you don't have those things in place, the cost really jacks up and it slows down the process. I mean, Jamie, I know KyWired's been talking about this for a few years. You all had some, some issues with pole attachments and the terms and the rates and all that. So that's just another, I know it's not too exciting to talk about, but that's just a real meat and potatoes policy issue that we can make some improvements on in Kentucky that will really help everybody in their endeavors to expand broadband in rural areas.
Right.
So I want to bring us around to like what Congress can do, because that's been kind of where we've turned first. As I mentioned in May, just about a month outside of really recognizing the impact of this pandemic. What could Congress do through the stimulus packages to make sure we're getting as close to universal broadband as possible to support remote learning, remote work, remote access to healthcare? What we know now is that the House of Representatives, right before the 4th of July, passed the Moving Forward Act. It's a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill, which put $100 billion into broadband supports with priority on remote learning. You've got K-12 behind this, you've got higher ed behind a big push around broadband. Most indicate from our sources that what the House has moved is probably dead on arrival in the Senate. But pieces and parts like broadband might have support and may get included in a final stimulus. What do you see as the most effective investment government can make for the most impact if we think about what our congressmen can do for their state? You all know these federal funds better than I do.
Well, I didn't know if that was directed at anybody in particular, but I'll take a stab at it. There's a lot of federal programs out there right now, and rural broadband. Of course, I'm speaking from a rural perspective, is really a hot topic in Washington right now, and it's one of the few things that there's actually some sort of bipartisan agreement on. Might not be exactly how you do it, but there's agreement that there needs to be more funding towards it. And there have been a lot of programs in the last few years, like the Reconnect program, several $100 million that's been out there, and for companies to apply for, and a lot of electric co-ops, we've got that money, a lot of telephone co-ops, a lot of cities and counties and different entities. So I would just, that program, to sink some more money into it and to continue it, because it was initially set up just to be a 1 or 2 year thing. I think that program needs to be continued and funded, and companies like ours or electric, or like any of the entities on this discussion, can apply for that. The Lifeline program, again, as I talked about earlier, for low income people, maybe some of the guidelines of that could be changed a little bit and a little more money put into it. I think that's definitely something that from a federal level that could be expanded on and help. But a couple of things, and that's actually using existing programs, and it's a lot easier to get that off the ground, and rather than just starting something new. Is a lot more difficult, and it takes a lot longer to get that kind of thing started.
Other thoughts on vehicles, because there are so many, right, at the federal level. Keith, you mentioned E-rate, and E-rate has typically been that vehicle to wire our libraries in our schools. But as we've talked about, learning's happening at home, not in our libraries and schools right now. So other vehicles, and then universities are a whole different, that's a whole different conversation, the post-secondary and the need for our post-secondary students to now do so much of their learning online. Ellen, thoughts about congressional help?
Sure. And, up till now, we've talked, I think, kind of focused on federal aid to expand rural broadband. If you want to turn to urban areas where, again, we have different issues, I know that the House passed a bill to provide a $50 subsidy to families with kids on the school lunch program. I don't know where that's going to go, but in terms of very quickly impacting urban areas and expanding access quickly, so we're not having kids fall through the cracks when we move back to the distance learning, something like that, a $50 voucher, it doesn't even have to be that much, I think would be tremendously impactful. You know, and if you look at other federal approaches to poverty, if you look at housing, right? I mean, we have a Section 8 voucher. If you look at food insecurity, we provide, you know, WIC and food stamps and something like that. So in terms of solving this particular poverty issue, something modeled after those programs, some kind of subsidy might be the fastest way to get the most results.
Ellen, I've thought recently of a program that some of you might be aware of, LIHEAP, which provides you know, support. Again, it's a poverty program, provides support for heat and electricity for low-income families to access. It may be some of these funding streams that Keith, you've mentioned, Ellen, the subsidy, are similar to LIHEAP, and being able to, you know, have that pool of funding there for low-income families to get them connected and keep them connected.
Yes, I'm very familiar with LIHEAP. I'm on the Community Action Agency board here too, and they talk about that every meeting, and maybe something like that would be very helpful. I know Leslie's familiar with it because it's a lot of it goes to electric cooperatives, I think.
Where we do have infrastructure, so that being our urban areas. Ellen, Jamie, thoughts on kind of the LIHEAP model, and maybe what you've already mentioned is similar enough to that, to communities like Louisville coming together to design their own, again, one step past rapid response, kind of LIHEAP pool of funding to make sure that low-income families are connected right now. Is that something that we need to think about as the next normal, not the new, but the next?
Yeah, and you know, there actually have been some innovations that have come out of the pandemic emergency in Louisville that I have been thinking about maybe might help us work through this access issue in Louisville going forward. We have, I think it's called the One Louisville Fund, but it's made up entirely of private dollars. It's just, you know, people have made donations. And so if you have some kind of pandemic related economic issue, you can go to this fund and say, I can't pay my rent. And then the fund will write a check to your landlord to keep you in your housing, right? And so I wonder if even that model going forward, if you could say, if you were struggling and you could go and say, I can't pay my $20 internet bill. And then, you know, that fund sends a payment to the provider. I mean, that's another model that I think is actually, and it's only been around, you know, how long have we been dealing with this? 3 months, but it actually has been very successful in helping people, you know, just stay in their homes and keep their electricity on and things like that. So, you know, that's another possible route we could go down.
Again, a next normal, right? Steps past rapid response, but not quite the new normal. We've got to figure it all out right now. Jamie, are there things that KyWired is following from a congressional standpoint to move us forward on this issue?
And we're probably more peripherally engaged because we are the middle mile. And I think, at least from what I've read and to my understanding, and Leslie and Ellen and Keith have touched upon it, we're looking at more the last mile regulatory issues, and certainly the predominant issue is affordability and funding. How can people afford to get connected? So we're heads down on completing the construction portion of our project. And as we go into more of an operational phase, I would like to see us collaborate more with the last mile providers again to bring that service in. Not to oversimplify it, I think it is certainly a cost, and how can we subsidize or assist residential, small business, educational perhaps, entities with making that final connection to provide service to that end user. I worked briefly at the University of Kentucky, and somewhat connected is they started a program with Apple to provide iPads to incoming freshmen. I know that's not necessarily infrastructure, but it's a component of the overall way this is all going to work. They've got to have devices to connect. So I think it's going to be, as it always is, about funding.
Yeah. So in our, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Jamie, right? So building the highway is one piece, and having a good highway is one piece. Then you've ultimately got to have the devices, right, to access the highway as well. So that's part of this equation as we move forward. In our remaining minutes, I want to bring us back to the end users that that we're trying to support through the supply of broadband. And just ask each of you, as you think about the communities you serve, Jamie, as you think about the state and who we're trying to serve, kind of share with us, just illustrate for us kind of the demographic characteristics of those who do not have internet, to really kind of, just drive home for our viewers who we're really talking about here.
Well, just my opinion, but in some of the conversations I've had, and I hope this is responsive to your question, through the use of technology and the benefit that it brings to the end user, whether it be into their personal home or to their local health clinic or their physicians or their educators, through the use of technology, can resources that are currently being spent on other needs, could technology ease some of that financial burden on those other resources to then provide more resources to enhance the technology usage? And by that, I mean, the example I'm thinking of is telehealth and telemedicine, and the enormous cost of providing in-person service to a lot of our citizens. Could that care be provided through technology electronically to perhaps ease the burden on other programs from which resources could be reallocated elsewhere, if that makes sense?
So that basically, Jamie, you're saying, as we think about there being a cost, a public cost here, it's not simply an addition
Right.
conversation, right? It's a repurposing and a better use of finite resources.
Right. I believe it's an investment, and then we look at the return on that investment. If we invest the dollars here, where can we benefit outside of that technological investment?
There are cost savings if we do this
In
right.
other areas, yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Several
Indeed.
studies will even say that every dollar that you invest in reliable internet, you will reap the benefits of $4 to $5.
Right.
So it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Right.
And so back to who really doesn't have access. We know that it's a different conversation if we're talking about urban, as we've talked to community leaders interested in education in Louisville. It's a different conversation versus community leaders thinking about education in rural parts of our state. But ultimately, we're still having a conversation about folks who, for whatever reason, don't have access. Many of those folks having low incomes. And oftentimes, because of the socioeconomic realities of our state, in parts of our state, particularly in Louisville, many times those families are of color. And when we think of the achievement gaps, learning gaps in our state, getting access to those families, low-income rural families, low-income families in Louisville, it becomes an equity issue in education. And so just as we kind of wrap up, I guess final thoughts from our panelists on the importance of getting this right as we think about the progress of our state in education, economic development, and health outcomes.
I'll just make one final comment, and thank you again for having us, but you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the equity issues, and that's something that is very troubling to me. We have so much inequity to begin with, right? And so now we layer on top of that all of the additional challenges posed by COVID and this need to provide, remote education And I think that it's just exacerbating all of these equity issues that we already have, right? And it's just critical that we get it right, because there are thousands and thousands of children who will fall so far behind in school if we don't get this right. And I mean, get it right, like, in August.
Like
Right?
now. Yes.
We don't have any time.
Right.
We don't have any time. I think everyone on this call, we've all been trying for years to work on this issue, and now it has really come to a head, and we have to fix it as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Thank you, Ellen.
And this is not a partisan issue. This is a Kentucky issue. It's an American issue that the people that live in rural areas deserve the same reliable access to broadband as people in urban areas. There's no color, there's no dollar amount attached to this. This is again, this is basic infrastructure that people need in today's world.
And we serve in Eastern Kentucky, two of the poorest counties in the state or the country. And, we realize it's not enough just to provide the network. We've got a great network here, but we've partnered with the school systems to do things to help these kids. We've partnered with the VA hospital in Lexington to set up a place in our local library where veterans can go and get telehealth, and that was before the pandemic hit.
Right.
And then we've also partnered with Teleworks USA, a company that helps people work from home, and had over 1,000 jobs created in our two counties for people working from home. Some of them with Apple doing tech support. I mean, our people can do it, but sometimes we have to be creative and innovative and try to help them and figure ways to help us through this.
Yeah.
Some of the problems we have.
And Keith, I want to underscore, and then I'm going to turn to Leslie for our final thoughts. But Keith, I really want to underscore you mentioning, this being a remote work issue as well. So remote learning, absolutely. But if we think about kids in families, we know that families who have been able to move work home and work remotely have been able to stabilize. But families who can't are looking at job losses and difficulties maintaining that employment. And so we really need to think about these things as intertwined, the remote work and the remote learning, because families are trying to get it all done together at home in a way that we've never imagined. So Leslie, you get the last thoughts.
That's scary. As at a federal level, as far as the support federally, as far as an electric co-op, we're looking to the state for help. We're looking for change at the state level to allow electric co-ops to be able to get into the non-regulated business of broadband. So that's where Kenergy is kind of focusing our efforts at the state level. Any federal help would be wonderful, but definitely just needing, I think Kenergy's trying to blaze the trail for the rest of the electric co-ops. But we are definitely trying to push, and it's an uphill battle for sure. So any support that we can get for rural communities is very much appreciated.
Well, I want to thank each of you for spending time with us this afternoon to help us unpack this issue, shine a light on the inequities that exist in this space and how we might all work together as we move forward to make sure we're serving all Kentuckians well. So I've appreciated your time this afternoon, and we look forward to partnering with each of you as we move forward, as we move the conversation from what Congress can do to what our state elected officials can do beginning in the 2021 session in January. So thank you each for your work, for your rapid response efforts, and for thinking innovatively about how we support our students and their families as we move into the next school year in still a very different environment. I want to thank Marva Johnson for interpreting for us today for the deaf and the hard of hearing, so that this conversation can be accessed by as many Kentuckians as possible. It will be archived on our Facebook page and on the Pritchard Committee's website to view at a later time. And we always welcome questions from folks, and we'll try to get those questions answered. Next week, we're pleased to host a conversation about reopening schools with a principal, a teacher in Kentucky, and the president and CEO of the Southern Region Education Board. So we hope you'll join us next week for that conversation, which will also include a conversation about digital access as part of reopening schools. So thank you again, Leslie, Keith, Ellen, and Jamie, for the work that you do. We hope you have a wonderful evening and look forward to partnering with you as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.